Hello, I'm Manuela Saragossa, Bloomberg Business News. And with me today is Bill Roedy of MTV Europe. Word has it that as a music station, you're trying to appeal to a wider audience now than you did in the 80s when you were targeting a rebellious kind of youth. And how far was your decision to change the content of your programs motivated by attracting more advertising revenue?
Well, in Europe, we're doing a little bit of a different thing than what we've done in the States because we're earlier on the curve. So a couple things. One is we emphasize music even more because of the language barriers. And we're broadcasting to 32 different countries, 46 million households, a very eclectic, diverse group of people. So we try and keep it fairly simple with the music. But the real cornerstone success of MTV is that we've been able to carve a niche with a very targeted audience, and this is 16 to 34, and we're doing the same thing in Europe that we did so successfully in the States. And we've had to educate a little bit the advertisers because it's a new concept to them, delivering smaller audiences but purer audiences. But basically that premise still holds, and that's a premise that made MTV in the States so successful, and it's also the one that we're working with here. If anything, perhaps in the States, as you mentioned, they are broadening the programming somewhat to include more non-music programming, but by far the majority of the programming, I think it's 85 to 90% is still music-based, even in the States. Here, we are definitely 90% music-based, and even that 10% is music as well.
Will that continue?
Yes, again, because of the language difficulties. Now, the other thing, however, is that our audience increasingly speaks English very well. And in fact, a recent survey said that 80% of our audience, again because it's youthful, speaks English as a second language. Whether that's high or not, I don't know. I think the point is that increasingly a large part of our audience is able to understand even the non-music programming fairly well.
Advertising sales for MTV as a whole were 30% higher in 1992 than in 1991. Over the next few years, what kind of figures are you targeting in terms of advertising revenue?
Well, again, Europe is a little bit different than the States. The States is still, even though the household growth is flattened, between about 56 and 58 million cable households in the States, it'll continue to grow, but at a much slower pace. In Europe, we're booming because we have a larger audience that still does not have cable, but as cable's laid or as dishes are installed throughout Europe, that number will continue to grow very dramatically. So in Europe, we're 46 million households. It's still not unusual to grow by 1 million households a month. Mm-hmm. And with an added transponder or two that we're presently negotiating, we'll widen our footprint, which will mean that we'll probably be the largest satellite channel in the world in another 12 months because, again, we're growing so quickly. And with that sort of growth, you would expect even more growth on the advertising side. So the good news in the States is that even though the household growth is state level, the advertising is still growing by 30%, and we would hope to keep those levels. In Europe, however, we've actually doubled our advertising revenue every year from year one until this most recent year, in which we grew by 70%. And it's easier to double, of course, on smaller numbers, which has been the case for us. But even that 70% growth rate is something that is very encouraging for us, and we would expect maybe not quite that high, but certainly very aggressive growth rates for the foreseeable future. Again, because our household growth is going to grow dramatically.
Is the recession a worry for you, the recession in Europe?
It hasn't. I mean, it's been a terrible recession. It's been, particularly bad in England for a long, long time, and now Germany's starting to feel it quite bad. And Germany was the train always for the economic situation in Europe. So now that is a problem. But for our business, it really hasn't affected it because we're growing so quickly, and we're a relatively new business. We're developing a brand new market, and you can argue in recessionary times that a buy on MTV actually makes more sense because you can target your marketing money better than if you were on a broad appeal television channel. So we actually work even better, arguably, in a recessionary environment when people are cutting back their budgets because you can spot or you can target your advertising and spend more efficiently.
So would you say MTV is recession-proof?
Probably not recession-proof. No, I wouldn't go that far, but You know, in many ways, the entire industry of cable and satellite is counter-cyclical, or perhaps not recession-proof because it's a little too strong, but as people cut back on their budgets, they want to spend more time at home, watching more TV, perhaps pay television, pay movies, more economical to watch in the home as opposed to going out. So in a way, there is a counter-cyclical nature about the whole business.
Since June 1st, European viewers have been able to pick up Popcom, which is a German-backed pan-European music channel. Has this been a worry to you to any extent?
No. Actually, it hasn't launched yet. And in fact, there's some uncertainty about its launch date or even if its launch will happen. At least what I read in the press. I don't know. I'm usually the last to know. We have regional channels competing with MTV in Italy already for some time now, called Video Music, and in France, MCM, and then if this channel launches in Germany, that'll be a third channel in the 32 countries that we broadcast. And it's really, I used the word competing earlier, it's not really competing because we no matter what happens on the national front, we don't think it's a form of competition. We think that actually the music services can work very well together. We offer the broader audience, which we have found, at least our audience tells us, that they enjoy learning about other music and other cultures. And the beauty about MTV Europe, in the aggregate, it brings a very rich, eclectic mix of music and also exposure to many different cultures. And the audience has liked that quite a bit. There will always be local accents on music. Even though international music tends to be the same throughout the world, there are always local favorites, if you will. And we try very hard to play those favorites and, in fact, work very hard to develop what we call European music, international music, first taking them in a country and exposing that music outside that country into Europe, and then even exposing it worldwide with the other MTV networks in the world. But we can never do as good of a job as a local station playing purely local music. So for that reason, the two work hand in hand, a local station and MTV Europe. So we're not, to long answer to your question, we're not really that concerned now.
Who do you see as your main competitors?
Well, I'm not sure we have really what I would say a competing service at this time. It's more, we're focusing more on developing the market. I mean, I suppose anybody who watches TV in our audience group, again, our whole business is targeting youthful audiences. Anybody who programs to that audience, technically, I suppose, would be a competitive effort. But we're much more focused on developing the business. It still is a new business, and we're pioneering a whole new concept, which is broadcasting across many different nationalities and countries and cultures. One step further, developing a business that takes advantage of that audience, which didn't exist before. There was no such thing as a pan-European business. And we spent really all our time and effort developing that business and have really not spent too much time looking over our shoulders.
Could you tell us anything more about your plans to expand in Eastern Europe?
Eastern Europe has been a terrific opportunity for us. I mean, for me personally as well, because when I first took on this job 4.5 years ago, it was well before all the political changes. And we found that there was a tremendous interest in Eastern Europe for MTV. It was like a window to the West, if you will, not only musically, but also, again, culturally. So we did a couple of things. We found some cable systems in Hungary and what was formerly Yugoslavia, launched those systems, and that started the ball rolling. Again, this was well before all the political changes. And then we launched on Astra, which enabled consumers in Eastern Europe to buy a dish and receive MTV directly. And even though the dish was the equivalent in some countries of a year's salary, quite a few dishes were being purchased because there was such a desire to learn about anything Western because of the close society and the barriers that have been erected over the years. And then it was like a steamrolling effect all through '89, culminating for us, I suppose, in November when we went to Berlin, East Berlin, to launch MTV. And coincidentally, tongue-in-cheek, I suppose, that same week, the Politburo resigned and the wall came down. And we have to be careful not to take ourselves too seriously, but there has been this whole idea of free flow of information, freedom of expression, and MTV, probably more so than other channels, epitomizes that ideal. And that helped in many ways, I think, in questioning authority and helping the barriers come down in Eastern Europe. So because of that, we've early on had a very special relationship with Eastern Europe, and that's continued up until now. Our audiences are extremely enthusiastic in all of Eastern Europe countries, including the former Soviet Union, CIS. We just completed a big deal to increase our distribution there. And not only is there just thirst for anything Western, but also they want to see the music from the West, and then likewise, as we go into the countries, we want to help develop the music scene from those countries. So we try and take as much as possible from that music scene and put it on the channel.
So what's the next frontier for MTV?
Well, we just got back from Lebanon last week. I suppose I was defying an American ban on travel, an 8-year American ban. I asked the ambassador here what I would have to do in order to be able to go to Lebanon to announce our launch of MTV in Lebanon. And he said I had to wear a bulletproof vest and fly on a helicopter from Cyprus and get the Secretary of State's approval and so forth. We found out that the TV station is partly owned by the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and he had taken a personal interest in MTV. Like we find in several situations in Europe, and particularly Eastern Europe, that the heads of states take a personal interest in MTV. I think for a couple of reasons. One, because of our very close bond with our audience, which is youthful and so inspired and so influential in many ways, that the heads of state takes a very personal interest in that. And in Lebanon, it was an amazing situation. As it turns out, there's certainly no danger, there's no hostage taken, there's no war, there hasn't been a shot fired in 2 years, there has been a peace settlement in place, and I suppose that while the bad news is there's still tremendous destruction everywhere because of the war, and we took a tour of the city to see that destruction. The good news is that there's a tremendous effort now to rebuild the city, and the idea of MTV coming in, and we're broadcast 10 hours a week, 2 hours a day on this brand new TV station that goes across Lebanon. The Prime Minister was saying things like MTV would help bring together the different factions. It's been really 3 different factions in Lebanon, the Sunni and the Shiites and the Muslims, and then the Christian Maronites. And MTV, with its unifying spirit and themes, and again with the youthful audiences, helps bring together all these diverse groups of people. We've experienced that in Eastern Europe. We just did last week in Lebanon. So Lebanon's only the latest. The week after next, we are going to Moscow, where they're erecting a wooden copy of the MTV logo to be placed in the Red Square outside the Kremlin. And we're going to celebrate this launch. There's an outside shot that Boris Yeltsin may even be involved, because we're told that he has taken an interest in this. He has an interest particularly in the Russian TV station that we've contracted with. So we're quite excited about that. We have some African countries coming up that we're going to extend distribution to.
Which ones in particular?
I was just told about Cameroon. We're launching Cameroon. I'm not sure when, but in the near future. We've been in Kenya and Nigeria, and with this added footprint that the satellite affords, we've been throughout northern Africa for a few months now. Morocco and Algeria and Libya and Egypt.
So could you say MTV has a healing effect on political rifts? It seems to...
We have to be, I think we have to be very careful not to take ourselves too seriously, because in the end we're an entertainment medium for the young. But I think the added benefit for me, the great joy about the operation here in Europe, is that in many cases we have become more than just a video music channel. With this bond that we have with the audience and the emotional response that comes from the audience because of the music and the irreverence, if you will, and the free flow of information and freedom of expression. In many cases we have, I suppose, have had at least a unifying effect, if not a healing effect.
On a different note, are there any plans to work with interactive television on MTV?
We think we're ahead of this in many ways. We see ourselves as an interactive channel now, not in the technology that we're talking about in the States, but we saw early on an opportunity to be a channel programmed specifically for our audience in an environment in Europe where the audience was told what to watch over many, many years. Not only Eastern Europe, but also Western Europe. So what we did very early on was establish this bond with the audience by having them call in, write in, request their favorite music. And that's expanded to a live show we have every night on MTV where we're constantly communicating with our audience, where we may have competitions on the air where we'll tie in an artist, and we may have a feed where we'll have the artist split screen from Los Angeles, and then we'll have our presenter in London, and they'll be fielding phone calls from Berlin or Helsinki or Athens, and they'll be talking to the artist and answering questions or requesting their music and so forth. We've also had live audiences in the studio to talk about what we call pro-social themes. We just had one 2 months ago, for example, talking about tolerance and diversity, and particularly playing into themes of fascism and neo-Nazism, which have unfortunately cropped up in several places throughout Europe. So, in a way, we have been ahead of the game on the interaction with our audience, and that's very much part of our strategy, and we're only going to continue that. Now, how you, I think, are referring to interactive television, we also plan to be very much part of. In the States now, as you know, they're talking about 40, 50 channels growing to 500 channels, which is a difficult concept, I think, for many of us to understand, because there's so many, who's going to watch 500 channels? And what pushed me over that I could finally understand it is I think the 500 channel universe is really an interim step to one channel, which will happen, probably at the earliest in the late 1990s, where everything is interactive and we turn the viewer into a user. The technology is here. The breakthrough, of course, was digital technology, which enables you to compress a single and suddenly get all these singles. And, the scenario I see, late 1900s, you come home, it's probably voice command, so we can avoid all the confusion of the flashing 12 that we have on the VCR that, everyone has such great frustration with. So it's probably voice, makes it much easier. You ask the voice on this box TV set what you want to watch that night, and they give you a range of options on the menu, and MTV will be very much part of that. And we feel particularly encouraged in that sort of environment for two reasons. One, because the interactive nature of television is a technological jump over what it is now, from the couch potatoes, changing the viewer into a user. And young people are more accustomed to doing that because of video games and so forth. And as we program to a younger generation, then we think, we're going to be very, very close to that. There's a new concept called Twitch time, for example. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah. Twitch time refers to the delayed hand reaction for a video game or a computer, PC, or even remote control. And for someone like myself, it's anywhere between 2 minutes and 10 minutes, I suppose. For the 10-year-old, it's measured in microseconds. And again, that audience is with MTV. So we think we're going to be in pretty good shape as it relates to that. The other thing that we feel quite comfortable about in the interactive multi-channel format, eventually going to one, choosing whatever you want, is that MTV has a very strong brand association. And we think with all the different options that are going to become available, that brand, which really is a manifestation of the bond we have with our audience, will different advertising constituencies, or perhaps different demographics. So, there's all sorts of possibilities we're very excited about.
Moving on, I understand you've recently launched your own production unit for TV, movies and feature films. any hints of what we can expect to see?
Yeah, again, that's just the U.S. has just announced that the American operation. They're quite excited about it. We're quite excited about it too. The idea there, I think, is just to take advantage of the tremendous creative pool that MTV has, not only in New York but also in Europe. Although initially this is an operation that comes out of New York, we would hope in Europe maybe to follow that experience, because we are quickly gathering a tremendous creative pool, and the idea is to use that creativity in other forms of programming.
Okay, Mr. Roedy, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.